Good morning. I'm Ellen Horseman at First United Methodist Church in Camden, Arkansas. This morning we're looking at the parable of the Prodigal Son. So before we get into it, let's see what is going on in this 15th chapter of Luke before Jesus tells the parable of the Prodigal Son. The chapter begins like this. All the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus to listen to him. The Pharisees and legal experts were grumbling, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So they're complaining because Jesus is with the sinners. And Jesus then goes and launches into three parables. The first about the 99 sheep and the man going after the one of the 100 that is lost. And then coming back and saying, "Everybody rejoice with me because I found my lost sheep." And then the next one about the woman who lost a coin and sweeps her whole house, and when she finds it, calls her neighbors and says, "Come and rejoice with me because I found my lost coin." So it's pretty obvious that Jesus is telling the Pharisees and the legal experts or Sadducees that God rejoices at these sinners and everybody should be rejoicing. And so that's kind of our background. So as the third thing to make sure that these guys get what he is saying, Jesus tells this parable that we normally call the Prodigal Son. Before I get into reading that, I want to just talk about, well, let me ask you a question. And see, you need to answer it even if I can't hear what you're saying. What does prodigal mean anyway? If we've grown up in the church, we've heard the story of the prodigal son or the parable of the prodigal son. But what does prodigal mean? I know I heard it enough growing up that I just kind of, intuited my own meaning, thinking that it meant someone who is a sinner. But that turns out not quite to be true. I actually looked it up before I did this lesson, even though the prodigal son. And what it means is someone who is wasteful. Really wasteful, squandering would be a good synonym. So the squandering son, or the wastefully squandering son, that's redundant, but never mind that. Now, later it came to have another meaning, an additional meaning, I should say, which is luxuriant or extravagant. But the prodigal son means the squandering son. And so that's the title that's been given to this very familiar parable. But it also leads me to a question. As we listen to this, if you've listened to parables a lot, then you're going to know this story. And if you're like me, you're like, oh yeah, I know what that's about. But I'm going to read it in chunks, and I want us to listen. And while we're doing that, do something that's good to do sometimes when you're looking at a Bible selection. See where we fit in the story, or imagine ourselves within the story, perhaps in the place of each person that we come to here. The question I have because I told you I was going to ask you a question, is who is the prodigal person in this story? We're accustomed to assigning that to the younger son, but who is the prodigal one in this story? So, having said that, let's get started with this story, which begins in the 11th verse of Luke. Now Jesus said, "A certain man had 2 sons. The younger son said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the inheritance.' Then the father divided the estate between them. Soon afterward, the younger son gathered everything together and took a trip to a land far away. There he wasted his wealth through extravagant living." Well, he must be a prodigal because he's squandering or wasting his wealth through extravagant living. And before we go on reading some more about him, I just want to say a little something about this son as well. Wasn't he rude? "Father, give me my inheritance." He doesn't even seem to be asking for it. In Jewish law, the inheritance was divided this way. It was a law, so you didn't change it. 2/3 of the estate went to the eldest son, and the remaining 1/3 went to whatever sons were left. In this case, there's only one other son, so he's going to get 1/3 of the estate. Sometimes a father might decide to go ahead and divide up the estate if he wanted to stop administering it because, he's getting old and he wants to retire. But usually the father would still, the son would get the principal, the father would still have the interest. But it sounds here like the younger son took everything, principal and interest, and took it off on his own. So the younger son, he's pretty rude, because to me, when he tells the father, give me my estate, it's like he's saying, I don't want to wait for you to die. I want it now. I'm tired of you, old man. I want to get out of here. So off he goes to a land far away, or a far country, as some translations say. And when he gets there, he uses up and wastes all his money. So now he's in a pickle, isn't he? He's used up all his resources, and a severe food shortage has arisen in the country, and he begins to have need. He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him out in the field to feed his pigs. Now that is really getting low, because remember, the pig was considered an unclean animal, and he's having to go out and feed the pig. He longed to eat his fill from what the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. So he's pretty bad off economically too. When he comes to his senses, he said to himself, how many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I'm starving to death? I'll get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me on as one of the lowest of your hired hands. And so he got up and he went to his father. Well, it's not too hard to see that he's a prodigal, that he's a wastrel or a scoundrel. He's not a scoundrel, squanderer. He's wasted everything that he had until he is in a pitiful condition. And friends, we can be just like the prodigal son. No, you might not be wasting all your money. I hope you're not doing that. But what do we waste? We are this younger son when we waste all of the gifts that God has given us, when we waste the abilities that God has given us, or when we waste the opportunities that God has given us, or when we, and I hate to say this one because I'm very guilty of this, when we waste the time that God has given us and we don't use it well. When we waste the abilities that God has given us instead of turning them towards doing God's will, because we are using them on ourselves. That's what I mean by wasting them. When we are becoming self-indulgent. That's what this young son did, didn't it? He was self-indulgent. Maxie Dunham, in the 12 parables, does a great job of explaining how we're often like the younger son. So I'm fiddling around over here trying to find my Maxie Dunham book, and then I'm going to turn and say, oh, I haven't gotten to the right page, but you are patiently waiting while I look for the right page. Here we go. Okie dokie. He says, like the young son, we often go to a far country or a land far away. And here's how he puts it. Our journey to the far country begins when we say, not thy will, but mine be done. I don't know that we literally say that, but we say it, friends, in how we live. Oh, let me get back to Maxie Dunham. Okay, so our journey to the far country begins when we say, not thy will, but mine be done. What we squander may be material wealth, but it will more likely be the abilities and the opportunities that God gives us to be our own best selves and to give our best for God and others. And when we spend everything we have, mistakenly thinking that it is our own and not God's gift, we can be sure that a great famine will arise in our far country, wherever it is. That famine might mean a loss of meaning in life, or a marriage that is empty, or estrangement from our children or from our friends, or a job in which the more we get ahead, the more we ask, is this all there is? You see, we are like the young son when we waste what God has given us. And when we waste what God has given us in the kingdom, we grow farther and farther away from God until we come to a place of estrangement or a far country, like he says here. The good news is we don't have to stay there. God, through his grace, is constantly pulling us to him. And that's what happens with the son here. He comes to his senses, or some translations say he comes to himself. And he realizes that his father has so much that he can maybe go there, and knowing that he has sinned against the Father and against heaven, he's just going to throw himself at his Father's mercy, not asking to be restored as a son, but simply to become the lowliest slave or servant in his estate. And God welcomes him. We see that in the picture of the Father. So, wait a minute. I thought you were going to ask me if everybody was a prodigal. Is the Father a prodigal? Now, hey, don't talk like that when you just got done saying that the Father is a picture of what God is like. But let's stop and read what the Father does here when he sees the young man coming. Let me find it. While he was a long way off, the Father saw him and was moved with compassion. His Father ran to him and hugged him and kissed him. And then the Son said, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son." But the Father said to the servants, "Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fatted calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. Now, the Father, Reverend David Luce says that the Father, in the eyes of the world, would be considered a fool. And I think that's what I started to say a minute ago. The Father would have been considered a fool. Let's think about this, not in terms of the parable and not in terms of us saying, "Oh, but you just said that the Father is like a picture of God." In the world, and in the eyes of the world, most people would have thought this Father was an idiot. First, when the Son was so rudely demanded his estate, the Father, or his inheritance, the Father just gave it to him. Then the Father is just standing around watching, maybe like he's done day after day, year after year, waiting for the Son to come home. When he sees the Son coming, this wealthy Father who could have sent a servant out to greet him, no, the Father basically drops everything he's doing and runs out to greet his Son. When the Son gets there, the Father doesn't wait for the Son to apologize. He immediately just grabs him in a great big old bear hug and kisses him. Then the Son says, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and you." The Father didn't wait for the apology first. He embraced him in love before that. And then when he hears that, the Father doesn't spend any time dwelling on the Son's apology. He just starts calling for wonderful honors for his Son. Bring him a robe, which would have been a sign of honor. Bring him the ring, which would have been like the signet ring, the ring that was the power of attorney that certainly showed trust. What else did he bring him? Bring him sandals, which means it's a sign that he's a member of the family, because the members of the family would wear shoes, and not a good time for shoes. The servants often didn't have shoes. And then he's going to kill the fatted calf and have a big celebration. The Father, he doesn't just restore the Son, he rejoices in the Son's restoration, and he doesn't require anything from the Son to get back into his good graces. He doesn't punish him at all. This love is extravagant. I asked you if the Father here is prodigal. Well, he's not prodigal in the sense of squandering, but as I told you, there's another definition, or a third definition for a second definition for prodigal, one that evolved later on, that means luxurious or extravagant. And the Father is certainly extravagant in his love to this Son. He requires nothing of this Son. He just pours his love out upon him. That is what Jesus was doing with these sinners, and that's what drove the Pharisees crazy. That Jesus was demanding nothing from them, that the table was wide open, that Jesus didn't care whether those sinners learned about the law, understood the law. He wasn't requiring that right away. He was just letting them sit at table with him. He didn't demand that first they get worthy and learn the law and go through the ritual cleaning. He simply welcomed them to his table. And that kind of extravagant love of Jesus toward these sinners is the same kind of extravagant love that God has to us, is the same kind of extravagant, prodigal love that this father has for his son. So that brings us to the older son, or the elder son. And what is he like? And is he a prodigal? Again, now we normally use the word prodigal for the first son, but if you're thinking of prodigal as wasteful, is this son wasteful? Well, he certainly doesn't seem to be. He's been doing everything right. And Jesus goes on telling this story. He says, now his older son was in the field, and coming in from the field, he approached the house, and he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants, and he asked what was going on. The servant replied, well, your brother has arrived, and your father has slaughtered the fatted calf because he received his son back safe and sound. Now let me stop right here. Was the older son delighted to find out that his brother had come home? There's no telling how many years it had been since he had seen his brother. Oh, no. As Jesus says, then the older son was furious and did not want to enter the house. So his reaction to the brother returning, and his reaction to the fact that the father is rejoicing, is he is furious. Well, again, in the eyes of the world, a lot of us would say, well, I don't really blame him, because he's been here doing everything he's supposed to do, and here comes this squandering prodigal son, and dad's having a big celebration, and it really makes him mad. He has rage, which means that he would fit in really well nowadays, wouldn't he? Because that seems to be all the rage, that people are angry all the time, that seems to be our default setting. Well, oh wait, does that mean we might be like this elder brother? I don't know, but hope it doesn't make you mad to think about it. Well, let's see. I want to look at what else was ailing this brother. Now, he's furious and he doesn't want to enter in. And then Jesus says, but his father came out and begged him. His father is entreating him. He's pulling him towards him. He's saying, come on in. But look what the son says. Look, I've served you all these years and I never disobeyed your instructions. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. Oh, he's jealous, isn't he? You didn't give me a goat. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. Let me pat myself on the back here. And then you haven't even given me a young goat. So he's jealous. And what's more, we'll hear it here in the next thing Jesus says, he is judgmental. Because listen to what he says here. But when this son of yours, and I have to stop right there, this son of yours, I'm sorry, older brother, do you mean your brother? But when this son of yours returned, after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered the fatted calf for him. Really, how do you know what he's been doing with that money if he's been gone in a far country all this time? The older brother, is jumping to the conclusion that the younger brother must have been gobbling up his estate on prostitutes. The father won't hear of that. He says, son. Then his father said, son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we have to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost, and now he is found. The elder brother, how often are we like him? How often are we angry? How often are we jealous? How often are we judgmental? We are the elder brother. Now, I'm going to read, I think most of us can see ourselves in him sometimes. I'm going to read you something from the Interpreter's Bible, a section that was written by George A. Buttrick, Reverend George A. Buttrick. His language is maybe a little old-fashioned for our day, but it's good. Listen to what he says. I'll let him have his old-fashioned language. The elder brother is very unpopular in the parable. He is not unpopular in society, and he has many descendants. He is sometimes an officer in the church, a leader in reform groups, a key citizen. He thinks, or wills to think, that all other types of people are inferior. A man out of work is simply unemployable and lazy. I was always able to find work, and I always worked hard. A prodigal like the younger son is just a wastrel. Well, actually, you can do nothing with them, he says. He has no patience with people who squander time and money, especially money. Any neighbor of a progressive mind is to him a dangerous element in the community. When disaster falls on the righteous, he doubts if it pays to be good, for he is sure that goodness ought to pay. Friends, that may be a little bit rough, but hear this. What he's telling us, what Buttrick is telling us, is that the older brother is like the Pharisees and the legal experts were. Not people we would look down on, but in fact the very leaders of the church, the religious people, the people who go to church every Sunday. And how often are we like them? Well, I come to church every Sunday. Well, I go to Sunday school. I read my Bible. I pray. And sometimes when things don't, and have that tendency on our part to look down on people, to look at people who are poor and decide it's their fault, to have nothing but disgust for people who won't work, to consider them lazy. That's the kind of brother this elder brother is. That's the kind of man that he is. He is a counter, and I'll get to that in a minute. One other thing that George Buttrick says, he says that Frederick W. Krummacher had an honest and penetrating comment about this parable. A questioner asked Krummacher his opinion of the identity of the elder brother, and he replied, "I learned it only yesterday. It was myself." Yeah, we're the elder brother sometimes. We are the elder brother when we go to the far country of what I call legalism. And what do I mean by that? We have a tendency sometimes to want to have rules and to see rules. And so we get this Bible and we think of it as a rule book. We decide that we've got to follow the rules in here, and I have a feeling that most of the time we think we're following all the rules. And we don't like it one bit if somebody else isn't following the rules. We see our relationship with God as our doing sometimes, and have a sense sometimes that we deserve God's love because we're following these rules. The elder son was like that. He was counting. He was counting. He was focusing on economics. But this wasn't a matter of economics in terms of money here. It was an economics related to relationships. He thought everything needed, he was looking at economics, but what he needed to give priority to was relationships. Things like love and kindness and joy in another's good fortune. The elder son is a prodigal. That's what I'm going to say. Now, I asked you earlier, is he a prodigal? Is he a squanderer? Yes, because he is squandering his opportunity to be at table with his father. He's standing outside sulking. He's squandering his opportunity to rejoice in the love that his father has for him and for his brother. He is squandering his opportunity to be in fellowship with his brother. He is squandering his very own peace of mind and his very own happiness because he's busy running around counting things and trying to make the Bible or life into a legal game like we make the Bible into a rule book. He's squandering his opportunity to be at one and to be at peace and to give priority to relationships. Look what he's done to himself. It is basically he who has denied himself table fellowship with his father and son. The father doesn't throw him out. The father doesn't say, well, look at here, you won't welcome my son back, so I'm not going to have anything to do with you. The father doesn't do that. The father goes out and entreats him to come in. But he's snubbing the father and he's snubbing the table. He's cutting himself off. And it's almost like Jesus is saying to these Pharisees and these legal experts, I am going to be at table with sinners. God is going to welcome the sinners. He's going to welcome people regardless of their social status or their economic status. He's going to open his arms to sinners and not wait for them to be ready of his love and mercy. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're basically cutting yourself off from me, because I am a God who reaches out to the lost and the least, and a God who longs for you to do the same. And that gets me back to the Father. We've talked about him before, but I want to talk about him again. Think about it, friends. This Father is a beautiful picture of what God is like. Because when the younger son comes back, he doesn't wait for that younger son to be worthy of his love. He restores him, he hugs him, he kisses him, he celebrates. And when the older son pouts and is squandering the father's love, he doesn't wait for the son to come to his senses. He goes out and entreats him to join with him and to take joy in the restoration of their son and brother. In the same way, God invites us to enjoy his extravagant love, to take his grace and his love and his mercy, and to revel in that extravagant love that he pours upon us when we're not worthy of it. And he invites us into the joy of sharing that extravagant love with other people. That's the point of this story, that God loves us and that God desires for all of us to enjoy his extravagant love and to enjoy the deep pleasure of sharing that with other people. So friends, may God keep you in his extravagant love, and may you be ever ready to be at table with all the other sinners without judgment without judgment. May God richly bless you all. Amen.